Randy Critical Live on the Fly. We've been talking to Lawrence Wilkerson and Ray McGovern about the politics of Donald Trump over the last couple of weeks. Now I want to talk about the economics of Donald Trump and anything, because Richard Wolff is not only an economist, he's a philosopher, he's a historian, he's a psychoanalyst. And Dr. Wolff, thank you for returning today on short notice. You're an ex-piano violin player yourself, right?
That's right. My mother insisted, and of course I did it.
Right. But were you ever a fan of? Are you a fan of Schubert's?
Yeah, I grew up on classical music. That was the only thing that my European parents allowed in the house. I had to sneak out to listen to folk music or rock and roll. We were a household of the classical music on the grounds that was the greatest achievement of the human race.
Well, I actually believe it is musically. I love classical music, but I do like Brazilian music, and I do love jazz. But I'm going to give you the floor for the next 30 minutes here. And as I said, we've been talking about some of the policies, some of the firecrackers, the loud noise, the red herrings that we've heard. It's the same old movie we heard the last time around, and it's 2 weeks of it. And I'm actually tired of seeing the same show. Can you just go from any direction you want to, and tie it into the economy, into BRICS, and maybe this thing that you did yesterday on Twitter that I saw, Deep Seek, and also you did something about what do you call it? Naming the expulsions, what do you call it?
Deportations,
all of that. But there's another term for it that you used yesterday. No. But whatever. But just kind of tie it all together. I mean, it's like this is so. I don't want to go through this for the next 400 whatever days, 1,200, 1,300 days of Trump trying to lay out an economic plan that doesn't really exist and has. There's nothing viable about it. We are beyond moribund. We are dead, our economy. So wherever you want to take it, Richard, and go off on whatever tangent, and I'll talk to you in 30 minutes.
All right, here we go. I've been trying very hard for quite some time. During the campaign, just before, during, and after the election, and ever since, to try to make sense as best I can of what Mr. Trump and his team there, what they see as the economic problems they face, and what the strategy is that they have as to how to overcome them. Try as I might, I don't see it. I can't make sense of their understanding because I can't make sense of the strategy, if there is one. And there may be one, and I may be missing it, and if so, I'll be glad to admit it once it becomes clear to me what it is. But what I want to tell you is that the specific things Mr. Trump has already done in the way of economic policy, and the things he says he's going to do, are chaotic. That is, they contradict not only one another, but they contradict themselves. They are theatrics of big, blustery, naughty statements and threats and promises, but they don't add up to a strategy because of their internal contradictions. And let me explain. I'm going to start with tariffs, because Mr. Trump leads with tariffs. Indeed, the tariff is the single most important economic and even political weapon that seems to entrance Mr. Trump in a way I've never seen before, and that makes no sense either. So here we go. Let's explain that one first.
All right.
We begin with a definition. I want everyone to be clear what a tariff is. It's a tax. That's all it is. A tariff is a tax. It just, instead of calling it a tax, which, by the way, earlier in American history we did, it used to be called an import duty, D-U-T-Y. We don't call it import duty anymore, although we used to. We call it instead by its other name, tariff. But right away, people's red flag antennas ought to go up. Why? Well, Mr. Trump is the head of the Republican Party. For the last century, the single most repeated economic policy of the Republican Party has been its opposition to taxes, its endless promises to cut taxes, to remove taxes, to end taxes. And look, the single most important economic act of Mr. Trump's first presidency was the tax cut of December 2017. More important in its impact than anything else he did, and in line with the Republican Party's commitment to cut taxes. Yeah, but a tariff is a tax. And if you're threatening to throw tariffs around against China, against Europe, against Canada and Mexico, raising existing tariffs, imposing new ones, then we have a Republican Party that has converted from the never tax, no tax, cut tax to hit them with a big fat tax, because that's what tariffs are. And that's strange, especially for the Republican Party. But let's continue. Mr. Trump tells us that the tariff is going to punish China for all kinds of things he's mad at China about. It's going to punish Europe for things he's mad at them about. It's going to punish Mexico, whom he blames, for the fentanyl catastrophe in our country. Or Canada, whom he blames for, well, I don't even know, but something, I'm sure. All right, let me explain again. A tariff is a tax. It's a tax imposed by the government in Washington. That is Mr. Trump. And it is paid, here we go now, by Americans. Mr. Trump can't tax other people. He can only tax American people. That's what he's doing. He's saying to the American people, if a good is produced overseas, French wine, Japanese electronics, African minerals, whatever it is, not only are you going to have to pay to have that stuff brought here, if you're an American business or an American individual, but you're now going to have to pay Uncle Sam, on top of that, a tax. Well, let me give you an example. Right now, the best quality, lowest price electronic vehicle, car or truck, is made in China. They won that competition. They are the number one producers of electric cars and trucks. For those of you that like to adore Elon Musk, I'm very sorry, but it's not Tesla. It's something called the BYD Corporation in China. Let's assume they have a $30,000 truck that they're willing to sell at that price. Okay, if you're an American who would like to have that car because it's the best quality electric car, or if you're an American business that wants to buy the best quality electric truck for your business, you would have to come up with $30,000, which is what goes to China to get the thing. But before you could drive it off the lot of your dealer, you would have to give your dealer the tariff that was started by Mr. Trump in his first presidency and then raised by Mr. Biden during his presidency. Trump imposed 27.5%. Biden raised it to 100%. So the $30,000 car or truck from China would cost you $30,000 to get the car shipped here, and another 100%, another $30,000 you'd have to pay to Washington, to Uncle Sam, to Mr. Trump and the Republican Party. So that when it was over, the transaction would cost you $60,000. That's why you don't see BYD electric cars and trucks on the roads here in the United States. If you went to Europe right now, you would see BYD cars and trucks all over the roads. Why? They don't have 100% tariff. Nothing close to it. Now let me explain to you what that does. Let's give Mr. Trump his due. Does it protect some jobs here in America? Yes, it does. It protects the jobs of people working for Tesla, for GM and Ford. They make electric vehicles, but they're not as good as the Chinese, and they cost more than the Chinese. But those are the only ones we can buy. Those and those made by Toyota and others as well. We can't buy BYD because the tariff, the tax imposed by Mr. Trump and by Mr. Biden are too high. So we all end up either foregoing such vehicles or else buying less good cars and trucks, electric, from those we can buy them from here in the United States, and they will be charging us $40,000 or $50,000 for something inferior to what the Chinese would sell and are selling around the world for $30,000. So, does it protect the people here? Yes, it does. We're buying inferior cars because we can't get the superior one. And we're paying an excessive price because we can't afford the tariff. But now here comes the punchline, friends, what Mr. Trump isn't letting on and hoping you don't know. The competitors of the United States around the world, companies that produce clothing or appliances or any kind of other thing, those competitors are able to buy electric cars and trucks for their business from China at $30,000. Their American competitor can't do that. He has to settle, or she has to settle, for an inferior truck at a higher price, 40, 50 grand, which is what the equivalent would be here. And you know who that hurts? Every American company that competes with a foreign company, which is nearly every American company. And those companies are not going to do so well because their competitor can lower the price because they have, a better, cheaper electric truck or car. And so American companies will suffer in that competition, and when American companies suffer, they load it off onto their workers by firing them. If I can't sell as many whatever it is I make as I used to, I don't need the workers I used to pay salaries to. So guess what? The tariff will protect the jobs of those industries who get the tariff from Uncle Sam, or in this case, Uncle Don. But there will be thousands, possibly millions of other Americans who will lose their job. And if you're smart and you ask in your mind the question, well, on balance, will more jobs be saved in the auto industry than are lost in all the other industries? The answer is that depends on each particular industry. Do you know for sure that we won't lose jobs from the tariff? Absolutely not. And by the way, the tariff is nothing new. Tariffs have existed for hundreds of years. There's a huge, rich literature in the field of international trade devoted to the economics of the tariff. If you ever take such a course, and I've taught it, you would know that a tariff is a very complicated matter and bears no relationship to the one-sided, lopsided, inaccurate, incomplete use of this tool and this idea by Mr. Trump. This is silly, what he's doing. He's using the tariff not because it's the appropriate policy in this situation. It's because he can. Because the Congress passed laws a few years ago giving the president unusual authority. This was done at a time when tariffs were not relevant. Nobody was talking about them. Nobody was using them. And it gave the president authority to impose tariffs. Mr. Trump discovered that when he was president the first time, and he's doubling down now and using the tariff and blustering around how it is somehow hurting others and leaving out the detail I just gave you, that it hurts Americans in all kinds of ways. And by not talking about it, it doesn't mean it isn't there. Let me show you next how the deportation of undocumented immigrants is the same crazy, self-contradictory policy. What does Mr. Trump tell us? He's going to deport 10 to 15 million undocumented immigrants. That's what the Department of Homeland Security tells us are currently in the United States. And we have seen in recent days dramatic pictures or read descriptions of immigrants shackled arm and leg, dumped in military transport planes, and from them dumped onto the tarmac in airports in Colombia and Panama and Mexico and so on, with more to come. Okay, let's take a look at this as an economic policy. The argument is that this somehow helps the American economy. It doesn't. Let me be as blunt as I know how to make the point. For 200 years, the United States became a big, powerful country, in large part because it invited and welcomed wave after wave of immigrants. If you're a white person, you are an immigrant's descendant. The British, the Irish, the French, the Polish, the Germans, the Italians, and on and on and on. You want to make America great again? Then do what made it great the first time, which is not exporting or deporting immigrants, it's bringing them in. Number two, let's take a look at what an immigrant is, economically speaking. Most immigrants are young, working-age people. Married, single. These immigrants know that migration is a difficult, dangerous, risky operation. So they don't bring their children most of the time. And they don't bring their elderly most of the time. It's young, healthy, working-age people. Economically, let's take a look at what that means. When those young people were born, let's assume the average age coming in is 20 years of age, just for the sake of argument. Okay, that for 20 years before they arrive as an immigrant here in the United States, the cost of raising them from the day of their birth to the day they migrate is borne by another country. If you come from Guatemala, it means Guatemala as an economy fed you, clothed you, sheltered you, educated you at Guatemalan expense. If you're born in the United States, those expenses are expenses here in America. We spend money to get the new baby ready to be an adult worker. But an immigrant is an amazing thing. The cost of raising them to age 20 is borne by the country and in the country from which they left, from which they emigrated. We get them here, and you know what? We haven't paid a nickel for them, unlike what we've had to spend on the American-born for the first 20 years of their lives. We get an able-bodied, desperate-to-work immigrant. And the minute that immigrant goes to work, what do we know? Whatever they are paid, and we all know they're paid toward the bottom of the distribution of income in our country. Migrant workers are poor. They always have been. We pay them relatively little. And whatever we pay them, they produce more than that for their employer, because otherwise the employer wouldn't hire them. Not going to pay them $10 an hour unless they get more than $10 out of that worker for doing so. That's how capitalism works. So we get a free worker, 20 years old, who's now going to produce more than he's paid by his employer. This is a win-win situation for the United States. To put it as starkly as I know how, immigrants constitute a subsidy to the United States economy, and they always did. That's why they were crucial to America being a great economy in the first place. You know what it means that we are now deporting these people? We are returning the subsidy. We're ending the subsidy and sending the subsidy back so it can't be a subsidy. And you know what that is? Crazy. Nuts. Why are you doing this? This economically makes no sense. The American economy shows its deep weakness by deporting immigrants. Let that sink in. I know it's the opposite of what you thought or what you heard or what your president told you. I wish I could tell you that this truth had been articulated by Kamala Harris or by Mr. Biden, but it wasn't. They basically went along. They weren't as cruel, they weren't as heartless, they weren't as nasty as Mr. Trump and the Republicans, but they didn't fundamentally disagree. They didn't understand the absurd spectacle of ejecting immigrants. So why do we? Well, we do for two fundamental reasons. One, because the leading thinkers of this country at this time, Republican and Democrat alike, have decided that the economic system, insofar as it's in trouble, and they get at least a piece of it, has to be blamed on someone. And so they blame it on a scapegoat. When people are suffering and they want to blame someone, they often make up who to blame. You see it in your private life, you see it in public life, and that's what this is. We are blaming immigrants for the problems of the American economy, when that's not right. The problems are victimizing you and me, quite right. Victimizing native-born Americans, quite right. And victimizing immigrants, all the time. But to turn these two groups of victims, native-born and foreign-born, against each other, we tell the story about how the immigrant is somehow a burden. They're not. They're a subsidy. But if you believe they're a burden and you kick them out, you're going to make the American economy worse off because you're excluding a subsidy to your own development. Your own history, America, teaches you that, but you're so upset, so willing to find a scapegoat to blame that you do not understand it. If you put both a tariff and a deportation of your undocumented immigrants together, which is what the Trump regime is doing, then let me end by showing you how these two together are even worse than these two policies separate. If you deport millions of workers, then there are fewer workers in America than there were before. That's obvious. The supply of workers to employers will go down because of the deportation of millions of people working now. You know what that's going to do? That's going to make the scarcity of workers enable those workers and their unions to push for and get higher wages. But here's the problem. Employers who have to compete around the world can't pay higher wages, don't want to pay higher wages. And they have ready tools with which to not pay those higher wages. They can automate, replace workers with machines, or nowadays with artificial intelligence. They can move out of the country to other parts where the wages aren't going up. And here comes even more craziness. The tariffs will raise the prices of goods we pay here in America. Because whatever the thing cost before, when we bring it into the country, we now have to add the tariff. That's a higher price for us. And that will go into the economy, boosting all prices. Therefore, it's inflationary. But we're still not done. The inflation will also come because if the employers have to pay higher wages because we've thrown the immigrants out, they're going to work real hard to pass on the cost of those higher wages to us in the form of higher prices. That's how the system works. So you're going to damage the economy in all the ways I've talked about. You're taking a major risk that there'll be an inflation on top of it. So let me conclude by saying Mr. Trump, who got elected in part because people were angry at Biden for the inflation, is running the risk of an inflation again, depriving the United States of the subsidy of immigration, and making enemies around the world as he slaps tariffs left and right because it's the only tool he thinks he has. You know what this is? A recipe for disaster. It's so crazy, so unthought through, so contradictory that one is tempted to conclude that this is a president who talks out of his hat with whatever he thinks makes him look like a tough guy. You know, like, I'm going to take the Panama Canal away from a sovereign country to whom we gave it with treaties signed by other presidents of this country. No. He's the tough guy. He hits them with a tariff. He kicks out the immigrant. The tough guy who is so out of control that he plays this theater, and the underlying economics, which make no rational sense, are left for people like me to expose when you take the simplest economic logic and apply them and cut through the bravado and the bluster to what is actually going to happen.
Wow.
This is, therefore, a sign not just where immigrants are deported and that's a weakness of the U.S. economy, because strength would mean bringing them in, using them, getting the benefit of a worker who cost you nothing in the first 20 years of their life and only enter your society at the peak of their productivity. No, this is a weak economy. Can't do it. We can't do what we used to do. Welcome and integrate immigrants and get the benefit, the subsidy that they represent.
Right. Well,
but we hide our weakness by a bravado that takes the form of changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What's happening here is instead of dealing with the economic realities we face, we have a theatric symbolism of the tough guy so we can delude ourselves that by playing tough, we are dealing with the problems. We aren't, and they're going to get worse.
Wow. Professor Wolff, you're on every Thursday at 7 o'clock with Economic Update, and we have someone here that whose book you published that wanted to say hello because he's closing out the show. Bob Henley, you know each other?
We do. We're on the same list.
Yes, yes. I hope we're not on a new one that's being concocted now.
Well, Roger Stone is putting it together, so I know I'm on it.
Hey, now.
All right.
In alphabetical order.
Careful.
I'm going to go turn myself in
Careful.
tomorrow. Okay?
Hey, be careful. Be careful there.
It can get really bad.
Sounded good, Professor Wolff. That was great.
Professor
really,
Wolff, thank you so much. I was earlier. We got another minute. Earlier, we were talking about it was a purge. Your responses on Twitter. People, please go to Twitter, Richard Wolff, and look at the purge and the Deep Seek response. They're really great. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Wolff.
My pleasure. And let me say, everyone who can hear me, WBAI is a very precious resource. It is a place where you can hear things that the mainstream media are either unwilling, unable, or lack the courage to dare to do. So do what you can. We're all trying to do what we can to keep this very valuable resource going here in the greater New York area, as comparable stations exist around the country. These are more important and more valuable than they've ever been.
That's great.
I concur with that. Right now is the most important time in the history of me being at this station. I think right now is the most critical moment. Thank you so much, Dr. Wolff, for all the time.
My pleasure.